What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and to another Overwatch League news video. And today it looks like we're doing a bit of a double upload because the Boston Uprising finally decided to unleash the news of releasing both Marve1 and, more importantly, Striker. Up until the rumors started swirling around just like a day or two ago, this didn't really seem like a possibility, at least this early on in the season. Marve1 in particular I think makes sense just because the Boston Uprising got a third tank after they signed him during the offseason and everything, but with Striker, yeah, that's pretty interesting, huh? It's all just very weird to me. The Boston Uprising, after all this time, reunite with their best player in franchise history. It's going to be a nice little, I wouldn't say revenge tour necessarily, but like a nice redemption arc for Striker in Boston after originally leaving on bad terms, but now all of a sudden, they appear to be on somewhat bad terms again. Maybe not on the same sour note as the first time, but clearly things weren't exactly right. And if you look at the explanation as to why Striker left compared to Marve1, they have two pretty different tones. Here's Huck, aka the Boston Uprising's president of gaming's statement on Marve1 leaving the team. Marve1 has brought great flexibility and veteran leadership to our front line during his short stint with the team, but today we must sadly part ways. Unfortunately, since last year, Minsu, sorry if I mispronounced that, has been reflecting and dealing with some personal issues. Together we have worked on trying to alleviate some of those issues, but came to the unfortunate mutual conclusion that returning home to South Korea, where he can focus on his personal growth, would be the healthiest option for his well-being. Minsu has acted like an exemplary professional throughout his time with the Uprising and this process, and we wish him success in whatever he chooses to pursue next. I mean, yeah, that's pretty straightforward, right? There's a pretty clear-cut explanation in place. It's clear that Marve1 maybe just isn't in the best mental spot, hence why he maybe struggled during scrims and everything during the offseason, and he didn't see a great amount of playtime before getting released. It makes sense. The statement was to the point, but also had a rather positive note, as they really did try to help Marve1, it would seem, with whatever he's dealing with, but just concluded that it would be worth it for both parties to move on. Now compare this to Striker's statement. Effective today, the Boston Uprising and Striker have mutually agreed to part ways. We are grateful for what Striker has brought to the Boston Uprising in his two separate stints with our organization, but I've concluded that where we are as a team is not the right fit for Striker at this point. Striker is a talented player, and we wish him the best moving forward. Can't you tell? I mean, it seems like there's a pretty major difference between the two statements. There's a lot less positivity, it's very serious and to the point with this Striker thing, so it's clear that something yet again has gone down behind the scenes between the two parties. Now, there's a lot of different theories we can come up with and assumptions and whatnot as to why the Boston Uprising went down this route with Striker. One would probably be kind of a similar thing to the first instance of him leaving the team, where maybe he's just really boomed, he doesn't agree with the organization, he doesn't like the atmosphere, etc. Or, and what I think is probably the more probable reason, is that Striker wanted to play on a better team. Maybe he kind of miscalculated when joining the Boston Uprising. He thought he'd be in a better situation than what he actually got. Maybe he thought the Boston Uprising would be better than this and they'd be some sort of dark horse contender this year, but they're just not. That's the simple fact. They're a somewhat young team, they're trying to develop and find their way, and as a result, I think Striker realized that he's kind of out of place on this team. He's trying to win more championships and continue to pursue greatness, as he did with the San Francisco Shock. And I mean, obviously this feels somewhat devastating for Boston fans. This was such an exciting pickup, one of the most exciting of the entire offseason for that matter. Just getting Striker to rejoin your team and kind of go back to the glory days, I'm sure that felt amazing initially, and I'm sure there was so much hype from Boston fans to watch one of their favorite players of all time retake the stage in their uniform. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous that this has happened for the second time now, and this is such dramatic fashion too. It's not like the first time where it happened during the offseason and Striker at that point just had no desire to play with them. This was mid-season. We're 3 weeks in to the 2022 year. What I'm wondering now is why did Striker want to join the Boston Uprising to begin with if he was so easily just willing to leave them so early on in the season? I know it might sound stupid because things can change really fast. It happens in team sports all the time, no matter what sport we're talking about. But Striker has history with this team. He's already gone through drama and a very toxic-ish exit in the past. So why put it up to chance? Why go back to this team that, while it did provide you some happiness, also brought a lot of anger? It's not like Striker is some sort of scrub, or I guess you could say unknown talent that a team was taking a chance on. Striker definitely had options. He wasn't stuck with one or two teams. No way. He is a legend of the game and one of the greatest DPS players to ever come to the Overwatch League. Such a dramatic and short-lived end to what was supposed to be an epic redemption arc, and a heartfelt one, if you will. In Marvel's case, it makes a lot more sense. There wasn't really any drama going on. He wasn't a superstar player to begin with. He actually was trying to prove himself again, but he kind of just burnt out, or whatever else it was. And he wasn't getting a ton of playtime anyway. Yeah, he had some good Doomfist performances from time to time, but it's clear that Boston prefers Punk and Azaria, and now Itzal's getting more in the action. They didn't necessarily need Marvel, and he was more so seen as just a risky pickup who maybe could have worked out, or maybe not during the offseason. And it's clear, at least from the statement, I guess you could say, that the two parties ended up leaving on good terms. It wasn't anything personal. It's just Marvel, this is something he needed to do. And the team really doesn't get affected that much in the process, so not a huge deal. And I really hope that Marvel ends up doing better with whatever he needs to pursue in Korea. With Striker though, I don't know, man. It just gives me some really bad vibes. Not necessarily on Boston's part, but more on Striker's part. I'm beginning to think that Striker was just a terrible fit for the Boston Uprising for whatever the reason. As talented as he is, it's clear that maybe he had some sort of selfish playstyle. He wanted the team to play around him. Perhaps he was very demanding. Maybe he was upset behind the scenes. All that stuff combined just made it not worth it. On the surface, that may sound kind of crazy just because Striker's a once-in-a-lifetime type of player, but it doesn't matter if he's bringing the whole team down with him. And I kind of feel like Huck was hinting at that. As if you didn't know, he made a tweet after the Boston Uprising defeated the Washington Justice in pretty dominant fashion, and here's what he had to say. I mean, this tweet just sounds like it's directed completely at Striker. He said, "No one player is greater than the team." Come on now. You already know that was meant for Striker. That's a jab at him. It just has to be. But you know, as devastating as it may sound for Boston fans, I think a lot of Uprising fans out there, especially after their weekend against the Justice, are going to come out and say, maybe this was actually the right move. Because let me tell you, without Striker, the Boston Uprising seemed a lot more complete to me. I know it's a small sample size, it's just one game and everything, but they looked a lot cleaner with their execution, their synergy was more on point, they were playing with each other a lot more. They just looked better, like a weight had been lifted off their shoulders or something. I don't know, maybe I am assuming things, but that just seems like how it is right now for the Boston Uprising. Striker had a completely different mindset from the rest of the team, different wants and needs, so ultimately it was better to move on from him and just stick with what they've got. Stick to their guns and try and develop a young team. What initially seemed like a really smart and excellent and heartwarming signing and everything might have actually been a poor scheme fit once the Boston Uprising got off the ground running. Perhaps Coach Laurie felt pressured into building a team around Striker, and it ended up hindering him and the rest of the team's potential. As great as Striker is, he might not be worth the trouble on your team, especially if he's also unhappy and maybe bringing the rest of your team down in some way, shape, or form. Just move on and try your best. The Boston Uprising aren't expected to do anything great this year, and that's going to work to their advantage. Keep your heads up, Boston fans. This truly might not be all that bad, especially if your team can keep playing the way they did over on Sunday. The only question remaining now is, where does everybody go from here? The Boston Uprising, I don't know if they have it in their budget to necessarily sign another DPS player later down the line. I'm sure Striker costed them a pretty decent chunk of change, so it might not be in the cards for them. They might seriously have to just stick with Valentine and Victoria. But hey, maybe not. Maybe they'll find a cheap option from Korean contenders, or maybe they take a risk on Naga or someone like that. As for where Striker's path lies, who knows? He could retire. Maybe he could go to another team, take a break this year. There's so many different possibilities. The only thing is, I'm not sure how many teams are going to be interested in him, at least while the meta stays this way. A lot of teams already have their hit scan options and solid Tracer players. And sadly, even though I love Striker, Tracer's his clear-cut strong suit, and there's probably better options on characters like Soldier and Widow and Ashe and whatnot. So truth be told, I don't think there's a ton of teams Striker could sign to. I think the Toronto Defiant would make sense, because again, they don't have an amazing Tracer player, but if we're looking at like the tippity top teams, none of them require Striker services, at least in North America. I don't really know he's going to do an APAC either, as the teams that could use his help aren't really anything special currently. Both Striker and the Boston Uprising are heading down paths that are quite interesting to pay attention to, and I could not be more excited to see what goes down and if Striker ends up going to another team, and if the Boston Uprising can continue to play at a higher level without their star. But yeah, that's gonna do it. That essentially wraps up this news video. Marvel's departure seemed pretty good, but then Striker's, not so much. Very different tones going on with this team, so the Boston Uprising are going to be in the headlines quite a bit over the next couple of weeks. But now I'm going to turn things over to all of you. What are we thinking of this Striker situation, ladies and gentlemen? Are you of the belief that the Boston Uprising will be better off without Striker? Or do you think that this is going to come back to bite them potentially in the near future? And where do you think Striker goes if he signs with another team? Let me know all of that down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video and you want more Overwatch League news content just like this, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel and enable notifications if you want to stay up to date with all of my most recent videos. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.